The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you, and enjoy.
A friend from Germany wrote me an email yesterday that is kind of apropos to this talk tonight. He wrote this. He said, "I wanted to ask you a favor. My sister just wrote me an email from Greece. She is not so great. She is in not so great a place right now. She's worried about our parents' health. She feels guilty for not being at home with them and taking care of our dad, who just got out of the hospital. She organized a cleaning person to help them, but she didn't show up and she can't be reached. The Greeks all around her are devastated because of the terrible forest fire that happened last week that took so many lives and homes around Athens, where she's staying. But of course, there's more. The washing machine broke. Her neighbor bumped into her parked car. She gets a speeding ticket while driving the garage's rental. Her son's friend broke a chair. Her son cut his foot while rock climbing. The wrong pizza gets delivered. But she enjoys swimming in the ocean very much. And as she's swimming, a dead seagull floats by. Would you have a Dharma talk that might help her?" So I wrote back, I said, "Maybe the one tonight." There's a great phrase that says, "Relax, absolutely nothing is under control." I'd like to talk a little bit about a practice or an awareness that can be quite revolutionary. For me, I found it kind of challenging my own concepts, but it also opens up new possibilities. It's a way of pointing toward true nature and toward resting in awareness. And it's about the art of nonfixing. And what does it mean to cultivate that space where there's nothing to be fixed? What happens when you explore that? So I'd like to talk a little bit about, what if your life is based on a wrong assumption? And a little bit about the art of fixing, which many of us here are samurais in fixing. And then a new assumption you might try on. And then an exploration about the balance of skillful doing and skillful action, but also about calling on spacious, non-fixing awareness. What is the effect of that? So we share an essential assumption about life. As I was thinking about this, it reminded me of a relatively raunchy joke. Three old guys are sitting around drinking, and they're talking about their first memories and trying to outdo each other. And one said, "Well, I remember my first steps that I took." And the other guy said, "That's nothing." He said, I remember the first moment I was breastfed." The third guy says, "I got you both. I remember going to picnic with my dad and coming home with my mom." Let that one sit. So when we're in the womb, everything's taken care of. Womb service. Everything is just handled. There's a sense of feeling a sense of oneness. Certainly there are traumas that can happen in utero. But then suddenly when you're born, the world isn't so safe. There are bright lights, it's cold, there are loud noises. And then as you start adapting to being in one of these portable flesh units, you start noticing that if you make loud crying noises, most of the time someone's going to come and get your attention. And at some point, you'll notice that when people look at you, they say the same word over and over and over again. And then at some point, you realize that that word they're using is actually your name. And then that begins this process of identifying yourself as a separate being. Suddenly you have a name, and then as life goes on, you pick up more cues about who you are, and you find yourself very much about relating to the world as a reflection on who you are. Quite often, for most of us, there's some early event that is particularly painful or particularly searing. And quite often that has a sense that you're under threat, or something's out of control, or something affects your capacity to receive attention, affection, and love. And then what happens is, through that searing wound, whatever that may be, there's a calcification. There's something that occurs that oftentimes creates a sense of very, very strong identification and separation from others. A good friend of mine, he was the oldest child, and he had about 3 or 4 years of just being adored by his parents. No other competition. And then that was followed rapidly by 4 more children. And suddenly he wasn't the shining one, but he was in competition with all these other little beings hungry for attention. As of course his mother was overwhelmed taking care of such a large brood. And as a kid, he would do anything to get attention. He was funny. He would entertain. He would also get into trouble. He would resort to getting in trouble because at least that would get him attention. And as life went on, he found himself going through lots of relationships, trying to find someone who would be devoted to him because of that very, very deep-seated need for attention. And he would often get triggered in relationship, get extremely jealous because something in him wanted all that attention. At some point in our life, the assumption that we have is that something is wrong. Either there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with life. And sometimes how it shows up is as a belief. Perhaps life is unfair. I'm not being treated fairly. Or I guess I don't deserve attention. Or I have to really struggle and sacrifice in order to be worthy of attention. Or I don't fit in, I don't belong. I'm not welcome. Or I can't rely on anyone to anticipate what I need. Or I'm not safe. Or if I relax, I'm going to be criticized. Or I refuse to be dominated. Or I'm going to give up all of my freedom and independence in order to belong. We all have what we could call a sacred wound. Something occurs at a pretty young age where we realize that no one gets who we are, and then we start to strategize. This sets everything in motion. Your entire life can become about avoiding that wound and ensuring that it never happens again. But there's an interesting thing. I think when you reflect on, what were those early searing moments in your life where you went to a strategy of self-protection, there's a very interesting element here, because that wound quite often becomes a gift. The sacred wound becomes a sacred gift. Chances are that if people weren't there for you in your life, you're probably really good at being there for other people. If people didn't listen to you or notice you, chances are you're really, really adept at drawing other people out and listening to other people. If you were told on some level you're not good enough, chances are you're really good at making stuff happen and getting results. If you were perhaps in a family system where there was conflict and arguing all the time, you may be really, really good at mediating. If you were afraid of life being too unpredictable in your life, chances are you've got a really secure job in order to kind of balance that out. So it's a really interesting element. There's a very interesting system that says if you look at what you're really, really good at, chances are it's related to that wound. When I first heard this, I thought, how could this be? This doesn't make any sense. But I thought, well, what do I really care about in my life? And what I'm really passionate about is this, having a kind of a safe space where we can really go inward and really make that really deep interconnection and express it in life. That's what I'm all about. It's all I really care about. So when I thought, well, how could that be related to a wound? And then I had this memory when I was about 6 years old. I grew up on a farm, and I was. It was really kind of a mystical awakening experience. I was leaning against a pine tree behind our farmhouse in Pennsylvania, and I just felt this incredible expansion, like I merged with the tree. And I think I've shared before how the only way I could describe it with my 6-year-old language was like the stars in the sky were cells in my body. And I ran into the house to tell my mother, and I told her, and she said, "Wash your hands, it's time for dinner." And just that sense of, and then I tried to tell other people, and of course, but that searing wound created both a sense of like, wow, no one gets me, but also a life that's been filled with a lot of passion. So it's a fascinating way to look at what created kind of your personality structure, what wounds, and how may they be converted into gifts. And it's fascinating because it can both be a gift and the wound can perpetuate. There are many, many successful people in the world who are terrified of failure. It's the fear of failure that keeps their success motivated. There are a lot of successful leaders who feel like they don't fit in anywhere. There are a lot of secure and financially secure people out there who feel like they're not living an authentic life, like they gave something over in order to belong. There are a lot of people who are really well-liked who feel like they're an imposter, that they're not really authentic in their lives. And it all kind of comes from this sense of life is not okay. There's something wrong that really lies at the core of the filter that we look through. And something needs to be fixed. There's a big part of that as well. So my friend who found himself burning through relationship after relationship and caught in jealousy and trying to find a partner to give him the attention he really wanted, how did he shift that? A little bit, I'll talk about that in a moment. So when you believe that something is wrong and needs to be fixed, you get really good at fixing. You get really good at doing. And we're pretty masterful in this culture. And I've always been fascinated about, well, what are the best practices? Like, what are the techniques that are going to really help me get stuff done? That's been a real passion of mine. And I've always loved the story of modeling through neuro-linguistic programming. And there's the story, Tony Robbins, Sri Tony Robbins Das, if you're not familiar with him. But he tells this whole story of how, like his super learning techniques that he teaches, it's relatively simple, but it's basically find someone who has what you want, do exactly what they do, and you'll have what they have. So he tells the story of how he was really, looking for how he could really take this forward. So he proposed this contract to the Army, the United States Army. And he noticed that in their sharpshooting training, they only had a percentage of people who got to a master's level. And he thought there's got to be a way that speed up that process and sell them a program that's going to make people learn those skills much, much faster. And so he began with himself. And he surrounded himself by like the 5 top marksmen in the Army, kind of the trainers. And so what he did is, the whole idea is find out who has what you want and do exactly what they do. And so he would walk like them, he would talk like them, he would breathe like them. He studied, how they would breathe, how they would walk, all their mannerisms, and he did everything he could to really be them. And what he found was that in a very, very short period of time, he achieved an excellence in marksmanship. And then sold a whole program, which is used in the military for sort of this excellence in learning and doing and accomplishing. It's fascinating stuff. If you think about anything you want in your life, reflect on someone who's totally exemplifying it, and then look really, really closely at everything they're doing and copy it. And then notice how that was going to affect how you change and how you believe, how you think, everything you do. So there are so many techniques for best practices in getting things done. And I've been kind of a student of this because it's just fascinating. Just a couple things that I found really, really helpful. If you get overwhelmed with email, as I do, the 2-minute rule, if there's something that you can handle in 2 minutes, do it. It's really amazing how much you can burn through things. If that email if you can do it in under 2 minutes, do it right away, and then it's done. It's pretty cool. There's another practice, if you're not familiar with this one, and I find this one helpful too. When I wake up in the morning, I think of 3 things I'm going to get done that day. I just tell myself, if I get these 3 things done, it's a good day, no matter what. And then you tackle the hardest one first. And you get that first one out of the way, and there's such an elation that occurs and can help really create momentum for you. And if you're not familiar with Tim Ferriss, he interviews a lot of really super productive people and asks about their morning routines. And there's some amazing morning routines out there, from cold showers to meditate first, to exercise first, to have your protein first. We can really learn how to get things done. And there's real benefit in that. There's real skill in that. And a lot of spiritual practice as well is about skillful action. When you look at the Eightfold Path through the Buddhist lens, it's really an outline of a roadmap that's really saying, look, where do you want to go in this life? Stop and get a sense of the roadmap. What do you really, really want? And then this path systematically takes you through. Reflect on what you most want. Learn how to focus. Train yourself to direct your attention so you're not distracted. That's a fundamental aspect of meditation practice and a spiritual practice. Can you narrow the riverbanks so your mind isn't going over here, but it stays focused on what you most want? But you got to know what you want first. And then reflect on your energy, how you use your energy. Reflect on your speech. So you're learning, you're training yourself not to create harm. Because if you're not creating harm, that's going to keep you moving forward. Train yourself to be generous, because generosity is going to shift you from being self-centered and stingy to being more open and accessing flow in your life. Analyze your livelihood. Take a look at what you're doing. Is what you're doing, is it really expressing you? Is it adding to the world, or is it taking from the world? Because if it's adding to the world, again, you're going to have more flow, you're going to have more energy, you're going to be more self-expressed. Take a look at wise effort. Look at all the systems you have that are going to support you in keeping your energy moving toward what's most important. And then explore how to cultivate mindfulness or non-judging awareness. Because if you can become more and more aware of how you're caught in judgment and blame and aversion toward yourself and others, that's going to slow you down. So undertake that training as well. Learn how to direct your attention from one pointed awareness to opening into the mystery, kind of the eighth part of the Eightfold Path. What's fascinating is how doing and wise effort is so important in this life. But it has to be balanced. Doing and accomplishing and getting stuff done does not necessarily have anything to do with happiness. There are a lot of very accomplished people in the world who are not happy at all. And what happens, I don't know about you, but what happens for me is I revert to doing in order to soothe my anxiety. If I can just get this next thing done, then I can relax and I'll feel better. But what I find is there's no end to the next thing to be done. So the question becomes, what's the difference between being really effective in the world and what is it to be awake and happy in the world? And that's where we have to explore this quality of deep relaxation and letting be. So there's a little aphorism that comes from yoga philosophy that says, as your consciousness evolves, you can find yourself doing less and accomplishing more. And that becomes a really interesting thing to try on. How can you actually do less and accomplish more? And quite often what happens is that when you cultivate a deep sense of relaxation, you start to see more clearly. The choices you make are more informed by non-judging awareness as opposed to being informed by wanting or aversion or confusion. And that becomes a critical piece. As a Zen meditator once said, I meditate for 30 minutes every day, except when I've got a lot going on, and then I meditate for 60. Like it's the capacity to really stop and pause before engaging back into action. So another assumption to try on, which is an interesting one. In the Year of Living Mindfully, this 12-month program, we have spiritual friends groups that get together and talk about what's going on in their life. And I joined one of these just to kind of stop in, and oftentimes there's a sharing about how are you applying the practice in your life and how is it showing up in your life. And I heard myself in the sharing. I said, well, my dog of 15 years died a few months ago. My mother-in-law, who lived with us, died earlier this year. And my dad passed recently, and I was actually at his bedside when he died, and I missed my mother-in-law's memorial service. My wife's health is really precarious right now, and we can't figure out what the cause is. But I'm really doing fine. And I was really struck by that, because it was very genuine. It was like, I really felt fine in my life. And it's a fascinating thing. And I've noticed sometimes on meditation retreats when we have one-on-ones, where someone will be describing just horrendous stuff they're going through. And at the end they'll say, but it's all fine. It's all okay. So the assumption, or the question is, what if everything is already okay? So a little reflection, if you like. If you like, you can close your eyes. You might take a moment just to contact your breath. And just for a few moments, let your awareness just flow with the natural movement of the breath on the inside. And as you just sense the flow of your experience, the flow of sensations and sounds and thoughts and moods, can you broaden your awareness out to the whole general flow of your life right now? Just sensing what's changing in your life. What's falling away? What's calling you forward? And in the midst of the flow of your life, what if everything is already okay? When you reflect on those words, what does that feel like on the inside? If you like, you can deepen your breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes in your own time. So what if everything is already okay? Is kind of a radical question, particularly in this kind of crazy time we're living in right now. There's a poet who once said, sometimes it's helpful to take the 3,000-year view. And there is something about when you look at the 3,000-year view, how our perspective really changes. This is not about acting. Certainly this is the time to be stepping up and responding to what's happening. But it's about responding with that broader view. It's about responding from that place. So our problems are only solved from a different state of consciousness. As Einstein said, no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness that created it. So we have to shift our consciousness. So back to my friend. How did he begin to get free of all of his relational challenges that came from that early patterning in his family? He did nothing. In meditation, he started to see that mechanism. He suddenly realized the cause of so much of his suffering all through life. Rather than reacting to it, he chose to take the seat of the witness. Again, non-judging awareness. And just to see it through that lens of non-judging awareness, number one, he saw how painful it was. It wasn't about turning away from the pain. It was also about looking very, very closely at how that wound had manifested in his life. Very unskillful behavior in relationships. You know, his patterns of selfishness, his patterns of jealousy, his patterns of self-protectiveness, kind of the nastiness that would come out when he would be disappointed again and again in relationship. He saw the whole thing by pausing and taking that seat of the witness of non-judging awareness. And he also saw how there was a very deep-seated belief that something was fundamentally wrong with his life and it had to be fixed. And when he saw that and really tried that on, what if this is not a problem to be solved? Something really shifted. It began to open up a sense of compassion for himself. And that really, for him, was the lubrication that began to shift everything. It changed his fundamental approach to all relationships, just to see that fundamental wound. As we say, you are not sad. You are the one who is aware that sadness is here. That sense of awareness, of non-judging awareness, is kind of the fruit of the practice that arrives. So there's a very interesting element in spiritual practice. There are practices that are all about doing. And they're very, very helpful, learning how to concentrate, learning how to go deeper and deeper into states of concentration that can take into very beautiful, blissful places. There are meditation practices that are all about developing that capacity to observe without judgment, to really, really establish yourself in that seat of the witness. And then there are practices that are all about training your attention to just be, to kind of refrain from that knee-jerk reaction, but just to really rest in presence and see what happens. And any one of these practices takes you really, really far. But it really is a balance. And then the question is, how do you balance wise action with letting it be in non-fixing awareness? Ram Dass tells this great story. He was with a friend, and I believe they were doing some chemical research at the time. And his friend said, hey, he had this deep awakening, and he said, from now on, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to be from now on. And then, a little bit later, his friend got up to make a sandwich. And Ram Dass said, whoa, wait a minute. You said you weren't going to do anything. And here you're making a sandwich. He said, oh, I'm making a sandwich, but I'm not doing making a sandwich. I'm being making a sandwich. So it gets very subtle, very, very subtle. But a lot of the practice is about arriving in presence. Bring yourself fully here. And then take that seat of non-judging awareness. And then just let it be. I like to think of them as three aspects of practice. One is focus. Focus brings you here. Flow opens you to the witness state. And then let go helps you to arrive in presence. So we used to say in the ashram, back when we were practicing intense celibacy, no relationships, no relationship problems. No car problems. And my friend Anam Tubden likes to say, no self, no problem. But how do you access that? How do you get a glimpse of that no self? There's a little inquiry that I love from Locke Kelly, who's teaching a lot on this these days. So let's try this on. If you like, you can close your eyes. And as with the inquiry practice, you simply pose yourself the question and relax and notice the experience that the question takes you to. So here's the question. What is there if there is no problem to be solved? What is there right now if there is no problem to be solved? And if you like, you can deepen the breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes. What I've noticed in my experience when I practice this, and when I've kind of led people through this, some people feel a real deep sense of relief. Sometimes there's just a glimpse, like if there's no problem to be solved, well, then what? Quite often there can be a sense of real deep relaxation that's sometimes followed by kind of a clench. Well, then who are you if there's no problem to be solved? Someone once said, oh my God, my whole life I've been creating problems so I can solve them. That's my profession. Be out of a job if there are no problems to be solved. But it's a very interesting thing, and I try to apply this when I head into sticky situations. Because there is some below-the-line assumption that there's something wrong and there's something that needs to be fixed. And when I can ask myself, what is there if there's no problem to be solved, it's not like the issue goes away, but how I frame it changes. And what I find is that when you ask yourself that question, when you explore just kind of letting be, there's a stronger sense of that witness. Rather than holding it tightly, there's more of a sense of, oh, this is just different energies that are all happening. This is something to be met, not necessarily something to be fixed. There's more of a natural flow, a natural state of awareness that the question may take you into. It's not like stuff doesn't happen, but it may not stick in the same way that it normally sticks. So this question can be a really skillful one to ask from time to time, because it points to what it means to just relax and trust the moment. The more you relax, the more you move from that fixing consciousness, and the more you can open to creativity and your capacity to respond rather than to react. So why don't we close with a short little meditation and a reading. You might just take a few moments to narrow your attention to your breath. Again, just notice where you feel the breath on the inside. And sense how intimately you can track the breath, exploring this quality of concentration or focus. And you may feel how this gathers your attention, this breath, and the pause, and then the next aspect of the breath. And can you sense this quality of flow? Your awareness of everything that is changing. And can you sense your capacity to let it all be without having to change or manipulate your experience in any way? When we explore the deeper teachings, the doorway is through a deep sense of letting go. Nothing to do, nothing to fix. We'll close with this reading from Kabir. Are you looking for me? I am in the next seat. My shoulder is against yours. You will not find me in stupas, not in shrine rooms, not in synagogues, nor in cathedrals, not in masses or kirtans, not in legs winding around your neck, not in eating nothing but vegetables. When you really look for me, you will see me instantly. You will find me in the tiniest house of time. Kabir says, student, tell me, what is God? She is the breath inside the breath. So deepening your breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. Quite often, our most skillful action in life is when it is informed through that sense of presence, through that quality of non-judging awareness. From there, rather than reacting, you can respond and you can create. And that's where exploring the possibility that everything is already okay and there's nothing to be fixed may give you a glimpse into new possibilities. Thank you for your attention. Thanks for letting me yak on this stuff, which I love so much. I hope you found it helpful. If not, you can commiserate by having tea and cookies in the back. And you might like to introduce yourself to your partner, to the people around you, which we didn't do before. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.